This is Mogoon, or Modare. Basically, if you didn't know, this guy drew every day for 100 days straight, producing masterpieces after masterpieces. So you might be wondering, what kind of super optimized workflow did he have in order to create something of this caliber every day? So in order to figure that out, I've watched over 15 hours of Mogoon's online course on Coloso, and from that, I've put together what I believe to be a rough outline of his workflow, which I will be putting to the test by recreating Mogoon's famous Raiden Shogun illustration from scratch. Along the video, I'll be showing you what I've learned from this study, as well as some 1000 IQ techniques from the online course. So to start off, I'll be recreating his artwork by following along with his livestream archive on Bilibili. First thing he does is brainstorming his ideas and drawing roughs, but my focus in this video will mainly be on coloring. So for the line art, I'm just gonna trace it, not because I'm lazy or anything. But I'll go into more details on his brushworks. Mogoon likes to draw his lines in a sketchy way, unlike the smooth line art of a typical anime illustration. For the brush, he used a normal hard pressure brush, no fancy textures or anything. I couldn't really include Mogoon's composition process. There's just way too much to cover for this one video. But if you want to see a video specifically on that, let me know in the comments below. And from here onwards, most of the information that I got from his painting techniques were from chapter 11 to 19 of his online course. Here's how the line art looked after I finished tracing it. Before applying base color, the first thing that Mogoon did was splitting the characters into parts. This will make more sense in just a bit. Only then does he start applying the base color onto the character. Next, using clipping mask, clip each layers to their respective base layers. The base layers are the grey ones that we split at the beginning. This also includes the line art. This layering system was quite different from what I normally use, so I didn't really like it that much. Mainly because you paint everything on one layer, so there was no going back if you mess up. But since Mogoon's process was all about speed, this layer system made a lot of sense. After all that, here's how the layers looked. And this was the layer system that Mogoon used in most of his illustration. Also, there are these lock symbols. These appears when you press lock transparent pixels, which makes it so that you cannot paint outside of the boundary of the shape. He applied this to every layer except for the base layer. One last thing to do before we start painting, Mogoon recommended that we should determine the types of materials early on, mainly deciding whether the material is specular, like shiny, or diffused, and to also label the direction of the light source. And these were the basic base color preparations that Mogoon does before he starts painting. This may feel like a really tedious, unnecessary process, but trust me, it's very important. All of this was done in order to make the painting process as straightforward and as simple as possible. And here's where the real painting truly starts. The first thing to paint was the background. He did this by applying colors quickly, just to build up some textures. The key to this was to use a paintbrush brush for textures. So if you're like me and never used these kind of brushes before, don't worry because all you're really doing is adding random noise. He does this super fast just to establish the mood of the image and to get a rough idea of the background, which will help with making lighting decisions later on. Mogoon even recommended to use as many brushes as possible to create random textures. In this illustration, he used over 5 different textured brushes. So I mean, this is probably the perfect time to use all those brushes that you downloaded and never touched. But for this image, just one streaky brush was enough. Because all we're doing here is just adding energies and power effects, not really texturing rocks or cloth or anything. This part was really easy and super effective. All I did here was brush colors in a specific direction to make it look like all the powers are flowing from this one spot. The cherry on top was adding noise to the background. And that's all for the background for now. We'll come back to refine this at a later stage. So as you can tell, texturing is probably one of the key techniques that help produce Mogoon's iconic style. Texture comes before illustration, was what Mogoon said. It's very subtle, but it's there in every illustration. For this part, I used the same brush from before and added textures to skin, clothes, and pretty much everything. This technique was very easy to do. By just adding some textures to your illustration, it helps make the image more realistic compared to the typical anime style illustrations. Also, the texture doesn't have to be perfect, since we will be refining this in the next stage. When you have to start thinking about light and shadow, it can feel challenging having to decide where the light hits, how are the shadows casted, and ultimately will all of this combined look good. But this is not an issue for Mogoon, since he has a plan on where to start.
기준을 잡는 거예요. 기준을 어디다가 잡냐인 거죠. 그랬을 때 여러분들은 기준을 어디 잡아야겠어요? 이 그림을? 얼굴에 잡아야겠죠? 그래서 얼굴이 잘 보일 수 있는 명도를 일단은 얼굴을 그려놓고 거기에 맞춰서 나머지를 해주는 거예요.
Mogoon recommended to draw the face first and then draw the rest accordingly. That's because the face is the focal point, part that everyone will look at first. So if you get the lighting on that right, you'll have no problem with lighting the rest of the image.
그러니까 보통 그런 캐릭터가 나오는 그림 같은 경우에는 얼굴에다가 이 명도의 기준을 만들어 놓습니다.
With that being said, you can now throw all that out of the window because Mogoon started coloring the back instead of the face. But all jokes aside, there's actually a really good reason to why he did that. That's because the back in this case was the focal point. So perhaps the lesson here is to start lighting the focal point first before lighting the rest of the body. After that, it's time to add lights and shadow to other parts of the image. This to me was one of the harder parts of Mogoon's workflow. I think the ability to accurately apply light and shadows comes with experience. But having great references will help a lot when you lack the experience. Thanks to the layer system that was set up at the beginning, this process didn't feel overwhelming at all, since you can approach each material one at a time. It takes a little time to set up, but I highly recommend you to give this layer system a try. While doing this, there were a lot of things that I didn't really understand. Like, why did he leave a huge brush stroke here? Why paint this part bright blue just to cover it up? And what's this? No clue why he added this to the illustration. But I mean, Mogoon's the type of guy to use math and physics to calculate how to draw shadows. So I'm not even gonna question him. And perfect. I'm gonna assume that this is some kind of big brain move that's just way beyond me. After the lights and shadows are roughly in place, it's now time to polish them up. At this stage, he switched to using a hard brush 95% of the time. A neat trick that Mogoon used was to bind toggle brush opacity to a button, so you have the option to swiftly toggle opacity while you paint. Here are some of the things to do at this stage. Refining the shadows, refining the materials, adding ambient occlusion, adding subsurface scattering, and checking your values. These are some of the things that Mogoon did in this video, so it might be a good checklist to follow in case you feel lost. But other than that, all there is to do was to make everything sharper and more detailed. If you look at the final illustration, things are much smoother and less painterly. And you pretty much do that by going over everything with a hard brush. This part is straightforward, but it's probably the most difficult part of this illustration, since this is where you will need a lot of knowledge on how light and shadows interact with all the materials. But you don't need years of experience to be able to do this. A mindset that he suggested was to think like an AI. Simply, you can't draw what you haven't seen. You can't draw light interacting with back muscles if you've never been fed the data. So if you feel stuck, try and find references that are closest to what you desire to draw. And eventually, you'll build up a library of data on anatomy and lighting, for example, to the point where you can draw from memory just like Mogoon. There was actually not much to do for finishing touches. Also, I forgot to mention that in the previous steps, there were no usage of any fancy blend modes. No multiply for shadows, no color dodge, it's just painting. In the same way, for finishing touches, he didn't use any crazy Photoshop touch-up techniques. All he did was apply a couple of blend modes for minor fixes and added a little bit of curve adjustments. And in many cases, he didn't even have to adjust or fix the colors of the illustration. That goes to show how his awareness of colors and values were pretty much perfect, which was actually very scary for me, since I've always relied on Photoshop tools to help fix my art. So what exactly did he do? Well, it really depends on the image, but for example, in his Coloso illustration, he used pin light to slightly tint the image blue, and then desaturated the image a little. But for this image, he simply darkened the bottom using pin light, and added glows to the lighting using color dodge. Some of his most used blend modes includes overlay, screen, color dodge, and soft light. There was no formula on what to use every time. They were all just minor touch-ups that really depends on what the image was missing. But if I have to pinpoint one thing that he does every time, then I would say that he used the blend modes to adjust the values of the image. For example, using them to brighten up or darken parts of the image. The other tool that he used from time to time is the curve adjustment tool. I covered this in many of my artist study videos. It's a very powerful tool, which again was used to adjust the value of the image. For example, in this illustration, he made the shadows brighter and the rest darker to create the feeling of a warm, overcast light. The curves may look a bit weird, but basically, he's just adjusting specific values of the image. Yeah, and that was basically the overview of Mogoon's workflow. As for my Raiden Shogun copy study, here's how it turned out. So, in conclusion, by just following these 7 steps, you'll be able to draw much faster, to the point where you can also draw like this in one day. Okay, maybe not. But hopefully some of these tips were somewhat useful. In the end, I was able to apply many theories that Mogoon mentioned in his course. But if there's just one takeaway out of everything in this video, that would be the importance of having a workflow before you start drawing. Because the secret to Mogoon's 100 days challenge was the fact that he knew what he had to do every day to get results like this. If you have any artists you want to see next, feel free to comment below. Or are there any specific illustrations that you want me to take a look at? Subscribe so you don't miss that video, and thanks for watching.